Last Friday on the Pix 11 News, we told you about a near miss over Newark International Airport between commercial airliners. It was averted by air traffic controllers doing their job.
Yeah, well, tonight on a Pix 11 Investigates exclusive, we take a look at controllers and what happens to them after things go wrong.
Mario Diaz joins us now with the first part in this in-depth investigation. And Mario, I know you've been working on this for some time.
4 months and counting, Tamsin. Well, do you believe that air traffic controllers are focused on their jobs 100% of the time? We have evidence that is not always the case. And as a result, in the end, people died in some of those cases. But what is even more alarming is where those controllers end up afterwards.
Operations.
Yeah, we got plenty of gas for the grill.
Huh?
I said we got plenty of gas for the grill.
You are listening to a phone call at Teterboro Airport between air traffic controller Carlisle Turner and an airport colleague. The date, August 8th, 2009. The focus of the conversation, a scheduled barbecue and a dead cat found earlier in the day on a runway.
Oh my God! Yeah, it was pretty bad. Ugh.
The smell? Look at the smell. They've been there that long.
At one point in the call, the federally employed Turner cracks a racial joke.
Oh, disgusting! Oh, that thing was disgusting.
Chinese people do it, so why can't we?
Oh, stop it.
Manhattan aviation attorney Justin Green knows this call all too well.
It was an absolute dereliction of duty. Somebody who stopped doing their job and basically was screwing off on the job.
It is a phone call that still haunts him to this day because of what played out seconds later in the skies over the Hudson River.
3314, be advised, there was an airplane crashed into a helicopter just south of Lincoln there a minute ago.
Yep, you know what? And I worked him. We were looking for him also.
If you actually watch the timeline, he hangs up the phone, and seconds later the crash happens. So the timeline is really damning to his call being part of the accident.
The mid-air collision left 9 dead. In its accident report, the National Transportation Safety Board stated that the controller's non-pertinent telephone conversation contributed to the crash.
Yeah, we got plenty of gas for the grill.
We played Turner's phone call for Senator Cory Booker.
It's jarring to know that really led to people's lives being lost.
Pix 11 News found Carlisle Turner living a suburban lifestyle in Chesapeake, Virginia. Not only is he working again, but as unbelievable as it sounds, he's working here. The air traffic control tower at Newport News Williamsburg International Airport, a frequent destination and flyover zone for high-performance aircraft from the military, as well as commercial jetliners.
It totally surprised me. In fact, at first I thought, that can't be right.
Senator Charles Schumer vividly remembers the crash. He was dismayed that Turner was still working out of an FAA tower.
Even if this gentleman was totally rehabilitated, it sends such a bad signal that they shouldn't do it.
Turner's story resonates with Barry Newman. The Florida aviation attorney had a case from an October 26, 2009 flight where a Texas controller lost his focus. Literally.
The controller was required by his FAA medical certificate to wear glasses while controlling traffic, and he wasn't wearing his glasses that day.
The controller, Mike Ferrier, admitted to not having his glasses in this handwritten statement. Additionally, his vision was not the only issue.
Normally, you'd have a black background. What did he do to his screen differently?
The controller decided to set his preferences so that he had a bright blue screen, which was the same color as the worst of the weather, so the two blended together. Where on a black background, the worst of the weather would have stood out very brightly.
In a federal lawsuit, attorneys argued that as a result, the pilot flew into hazardous weather. This is all that was left of the aircraft. 4 people died. As for Ferrier, he's still with the FAA. In fact, he was back on the job weeks after the deadly crash, telling investigators that he had acquired glasses and now wears them during air traffic duties.
Oh, we have 75256 North Turner.
In an extensive investigation, Pix 11 News has identified 15 deadly crashes since 1998 where actions by air traffic controllers were a contributing factor. Those crashes resulted in 54 deaths. The litigation resulting from several of these crashes came at a steep price to American taxpayers. Public records indicate that the federal government has made either verdict or settlement payments of more than $100 million. Additionally, our investigation revealed that Turner and Ferrier are not alone. We uncovered several other controllers involved in a number of these deadly crashes who are currently listed on the agency's online employment directory. working out of FAA towers or control centers.
Personally speaking, over the last 25 years of having practiced aviation law, I can't think of a particular instance where there was an accident involving air traffic control negligence where that controller was removed from their primary responsibility for directing traffic as a result of the accident.
Gregory Winton is a Maryland aviation attorney. Prior to going into private practice, he was an attorney for the Department of Justice and the FAA.
You represented primarily who?
The air traffic controllers and FAA or United States government employees.
There are more than 15,000 controllers across the nation working in towers or at centers like this one just outside of San Diego, California. As part of our investigation, we approached the National Air Traffic Controllers Association as well as the Airline Pilots Association. Both unions declined to participate. They weren't the only ones. On the mission page of the FAA website, the agency uses such words as safety, accountability, and transparency. So we came here to the FAA's headquarters in Washington, D.C., hoping that the agency would be transparent with us about accountability measures surrounding Carlisle Turner as well as other controllers. Because at the very core of this investigation is the public's safety. Their response? An email from an FAA spokeswoman stating that they would respond to all of our inquiries collectively. As for those answers, we're still waiting.
This is a huge embarrassment to the FAA.
Arthur Wolk is an aviation attorney based out of Philadelphia. A pilot himself. Listen to how he describes the collaboration between pilots and controllers.
We, as pilots, depend on air traffic control. It is our lifeline.
As for the FAA allowing controllers who have contributed to deadly mistakes going back to control towers or centers?
What really this is the government stonewalling what amounts to incompetent behavior that can, does, and has resulted in death.
Justin Green, who represented the family of the chopper pilot in the Hudson mid-air crash, echoes those sentiments. He also believes that the agency is vested in creating a positive image of its controllers.
I think the FAA, obviously has an interest in not having the controllers blamed.
We tried to speak with lawmakers Senator Jay Rockefeller and Representative Frank Lobiondo, both of whom are leaders of Senate and House committees involving aviation. They declined our interview requests.
It does need to be changed. People need to be held accountable.
Representative John Mica, on the other hand, was available. The Florida congressman is the former chairman of the House Transportation Committee, as well as the former chair of the House Aviation Subcommittee.
The bad players, and they're just a handful, but they have caused death, mayhem, and they're still on the job. That's not fair.
Senator Schumer did not hold back either.
When I heard about Turner, I was shocked. And so hearing that there are others makes me even more worried.
In fact, New York's senior senator now wants to hear from the same agency that failed to respond to us, the FAA.
I'm not going to tell them how to do it, but I want to hear what they're saying.
Representative Mica, whose party loyalty sits across the aisle from Senator Schumer, is in agreement.
If we have to haul people in before Congress and seek, again, the information that you have already found, which is public record, and then act responsibly, we need to do that.
It should be noted that while the NTSB finds fault with pilots in nearly every crash, in the cases that Pix 11 News examined where the federal government did make payouts, it was not only the families of the victims who were compensated, but also relatives of the pilots.
Just really remarkable findings.
Scott and Tampson, in the 15 crashes that we revealed 24 hours ago where air traffic controllers were a contributing factor, there were 54 deaths. Additionally, there were only 3 survivors. Tonight, in her first television interview in 4 years, Jordan Wells shares her story and reacts to news of the key controller in her crash, who continues to be employed by the FAA at the control tower of Andrews Air Force Base.
They said for everyone in the helicopter, it was 100% unsurvivable, including me. They said there's no way I should have survived it. It's only by the grace of God that I lived through that accident.
Jordan Wells was 18 years old when on a rainy night back on September 27, 2008, she and her friend were being transported to the hospital via a Maryland State Police medevac helicopter. This after her car hydroplaned off a Maryland road. The flight never reached its destination. This is all that was left from Trooper 2 after it was discovered in the woods near Andrews Air Force Base. 4 people died. Wells miraculously survived. but it came at the expense of her right leg, which had to be amputated below the knee.
I mean, there's so many people, and I don't want to point fingers because I'm one of them that dropped the ball that night, and it really was a perfect storm.
To this day, Wells struggles with survivor's guilt. And while the battle has been challenging, it should be noted that the National Transportation Safety Board found fault with the pilot, the state of Maryland, as well as multiple air traffic controllers for being a contributing factor to the deadly crash.
Different air traffic controllers did drop the ball.
The NTSB's investigation found the pilot's workload increased as a result of the poor skills of the controllers.
Stephen was the pilot, and he called in for help. He was asking for help, and they walked away without their headphones on.
According to the NTSB's Air Traffic Controllers Group Chairman's factual report, controllers from 3 Washington, D.C. area facilities, including the towers at Reagan National Airport and at Andrews Air Force Base, were identified. Teal Hyman was the controller at Andrews and the last one to be in contact with the flight. Due to poor visibility as a result of weather, Trooper 2's pilot requested an airport surveillance radar approach. The maneuver is known in aviation circles as a blind landing, where the pilot relies upon the controller for navigational guidance. The controller during the procedure is to provide exclusive support, meaning they cannot work other flights. Hyman, who was alone at the time and had more than 20 years of FAA experience, informed the pilot requesting assistance that the Trooper 2 flight was the first aircraft they had seen in a long time, and that she was not qualified in her training to assist with an ASR approach, as detailed in this NTSB video presentation of the deadly crash.
The controller states that she is not current and cannot provide the service.
It was her actions and more likely her inactions that contributed to that accident.
Gregory Winton is the aviation attorney who represented Wells following the crash.
The NTSB categorized the FAA's actions in this case as casual and sloppy. I'd say it was casual and sloppy at its best.
Winton, also a pilot, finds the crash additionally disturbing due to the significance of where Hyman was based.
We're talking about Andrews Air Force Base. You would think that the best controllers in the world would be working there because that's where the president keeps Air Force One.
Marine One flies there too.
Marine One as well, correct. So when Air Force One lands and receives a clearance to land, it comes from the control tower at Andrews Air Force Base, which is where Ms. Hyman was working that evening.
9 days after the crash, this FAA memo called for an action plan proposing that all controllers be certified and current on all positions of operation in the control tower. Months later, the official NTSB accident report noted that approximately 75% of the controllers at Andrews achieved the required qualifications for ASR approaches. Subsequently, the FAA suspended ASR approaches at Andrews because of an internal dispute. As for Hyman, the FAA's online employee directory clearly shows that she is still working at the control tower at Andrews. In fact, the Air Traffic Controllers Union has her listed online as the safety representative at Andrews. When I informed Wells that Hyman was still on the job, she was perplexed.
I don't know. I was told she lost her job. I don't know.
She's still on the job at Andrews.
Well, I would hope that she learned her lesson.
It's just, for us, it's striking because it's the same airport as the president.
Yeah. No, that is very striking to me.
Oh, 75256 North Tower.
In an extensive investigation, Pix 11 News has identified 15 deadly crashes since 1998 where actions by air traffic controllers were a contributing factor. Those crashes resulted in 54 deaths. The litigation resulting from several of these crashes came at a steep price to American taxpayers. Public records indicate that the federal government has made either verdict or settlement payments of more than $100 million. Winton, who at the start of his career defended air traffic controllers and the FAA, found the numbers bothersome, but was not taken aback.
Personally speaking, over the last 25 years of having practiced aviation law, I can't think of a particular instance where there was an accident involving air traffic control negligence where that controller was removed from their primary responsibility for directing traffic as a result of the accident.
In the Trooper 2 case, the NTSB accident report cited multiple controllers for numerous procedural deficiencies, a number of mistakes committed in what is the most secured airspace in the nation.
The D.C. airspace is very complex because of all the restricted airspace and the concerns for homeland security.
Barry Newman is an aviation attorney out of Jacksonville, Florida. Listen to how he describes the controllers that manage the airspace not only occupied by the president, but also commercial airliners.
I believe the best of the best controllers are probably located here in New York and Atlanta, where the air traffic is the heaviest.
As for Newman's perspective on controllers back on the job following an accident, he was not too surprised as a result of his experience with other crashes, where controllers were back on the job in a matter of
days.
I'm sorry?
Days.
Motherhood and religion have made it easier for Wells to forge ahead. But as she reflected during our conversation, she shared that there will never come a day where the sight or sound of a helicopter will not transport her back to the woods near Andrews and the lives lost in the deadly crash.
At first, I used to cry as soon as I hear it. I wouldn't even get sad first. I would just start breaking down crying. It brings me back to that night, and I just think about what I've been through, and I think about how far I've come, and it's a reminder that I was meant to do so much more in this world.
Should be noted that Wells was compensated in a settlement with the U.S. government. Winton, who was in the room during our entire interview with Wells, would not discuss the details of the settlement.
Well, the FAA and members of Congress are now responding. Pix 11's Mario Diaz joins us now with more on the reaction. Mario.
Scott and Tamsin, last night we shared the response from the office of Representative Frank Lobiondo out of New Jersey to reports where the federal government paid out more than $100 million following 15 crashes that resulted in 54 deaths. Controllers involved in some of those deadly crashes are back in FAA towers and control centers. And that does not sit well at all with one U.S. congressman who told me today that he is going to probe the FAA.
How did the first sentence read in the FAA's response to Pix 11 News surrounding our investigative series of reports regarding air traffic controllers back in FAA towers or centers after contributing to deadly crashes? They simply stated the Federal Aviation Administration operates the safest aviation system in the world, to which Representative Sean Patrick Maloney out of the 18th District of New York said in a call with Pix 11 News this afternoon.
I think it's not good enough to say we run a safe system.
This is all a result of a 4-month-long investigation by Pix 11 News that uncovered several air traffic controllers involved in a number of deadly crashes who are currently listed on the agency's online employment directory, working out of FAA towers or control centers. In fact, according to Florida aviation attorney Barry Newman, some controllers were back on the job in a matter of
days.
I'm sorry?
Days.
Arthur Wolk, an aviation attorney out of Philadelphia, summed up our investigation in 8 words.
This is a huge embarrassment to the FAA.
The office of Senator Marco Rubio of Florida weighed into Pix 11 News with the following reaction to our investigation. Air travelers should be assured that well-trained professional air traffic controllers maintain the safest airspace in the world. The FAA must hold controllers accountable when mistakes are made on the job and make sure safety is always the #1 priority. The FAA, in its statement, also stated that non-punitive safety reporting systems also encourage controllers and other aviation professionals to report safety incidents so that the FAA can fully understand what happened and implement any necessary corrective actions. The agency is referring to the Air Traffic Safety Action Program, created between the National Air Traffic Controllers Association and the FAA, where controllers cannot be decertified, nor can any credentialing action take place if they self-report a compromise in safety. The Department of Transportation Inspector General, the federal monitor of the FAA, said in this July 2012 report that the collaboration lacks transparency and accountability, as well as oversight as a result of the involvement of the Controllers Union.
The bad players, and they're just a handful, but they have caused death, mayhem, and they're still on the job. That's not fair.
Representative John Mica voiced his opinion to Pix 11 in the midst of our investigation. The former chairman of the House Transportation Committee, as well as the former chairman of the House Aviation Subcommittee, feels that controllers are being shielded.
This pendulum has swung, I think, too far in the direction of protecting people who should be held accountable and who should be dismissed.
But to hold the FAA accountable takes action. Representative Maloney, a member of the House Aviation Subcommittee, says that he is going to do just that.
Well, I'm going to take action on it, and what we're going to start with is getting the answers that to the questions you've posed in your report, Mario, and we'll take it from there, and we'll let the chips fall where they may. This is a public safety issue, and it's too serious to let politics get in the way. So I'm writing to the FAA, and I want answers to the questions you raised, and we'll share them with you.
The FAA in its statement added that controllers are covered by the provisions of the National Air Traffic Controllers Association contract. And while the FAA on its mission page clearly boasts that it is accountable not to a union, but to the American public, as Senator Charles Schumer said in our recent interview, that policy should be examined for one simple reason.
This is a very important job, one of the most important jobs there is in America, because you have people's lives in your hands, and there ought to be strict standards.
In our phone call, Representative Maloney added that he will be sending a letter to the FAA asking for what they failed to provide us, transparency. The representative from Putnam County says that the public deserves answers.
Tomorrow.
Operations.
We got plenty of gas for the grill.
Huh?
I said we got plenty of gas for the grill.
This is the phone call that started our Pix 11 investigation. The audio is from 2009, recorded minutes before a deadly mid-air collision over the Hudson. Thanks for staying with us, everybody. I'm John Muller.
And I'm Tamsin Fidel. It was just about 90 days ago when Pix 11's Mario Diaz filed the first in a series of really shocking reports on air traffic controllers back in FAA towers or control centers after being involved in deadly crashes.
Well, Mario kept digging, and what he has uncovered in what is now a 7-month-long investigation is beyond troubling. Mario is back with more crashes, more controllers on the job, and the unbelievable story of who's not on the job. Mario.
Tamsin and John, as you just mentioned, we are now 7 months and counting into our below-the-radar investigation. What we reported back on April 28th were 15 deadly crashes, 54 deaths, and more than 12 controllers who stayed on the job after contributing to those deadly crashes. Tonight, we have much more. You'll see what happened to one controller following a crash, and we travel back to Washington, D.C. for answers from the second most powerful man at the FAA.
Somebody needs to light a little bit of a fire under the FAA in this regard.
That is the reaction of U.S. Senator Charles Schumer back on May 4th following our series of below-the-radar reports. 24 hours later, U.S. Representative Sean Patrick Maloney fired off this inquiry letter to the FAA and said this to Pix 11 News.
The public has a right to know when they're flying on a plane whether it's being monitored by an air traffic controller that may have been responsible for a crash.
Since our initial series of reports focused on air traffic controllers back in FAA towers or control centers after being a contributing factor to a deadly crash,
There was an airplane crashed into a helicopter.
Pix 11 News has examined an additional 20 crashes dating back to 2000, totaling 50 more deaths, with public records indicating millions more paid out by the federal government through verdict or settlement payments. And of course, more air traffic controllers who continue working out of FAA towers or control centers, according to the FAA's employment directory page. Of all the new crashes and controllers, none stood out more than a crash off the Florida coast on July 8th, 2009. On that date, 5 men were flying into Tampa when suddenly their twin-engine Cessna disappeared from radar.
We're in a mayday, mayday, mayday. We're upside down. My God, hurry.
Satellite images at the time the 5 men vanished illustrate thunderstorm activity over the area. Eventually, pieces of the plane were recovered from the Gulf of Mexico. All 5 men died.
The controller didn't give the weather information he was required to give.
John Kettles is an aviation attorney based out of Dallas, Texas. He represented the estate of the pilot in a federal lawsuit against the government. In that case, Kettles focused on the actions of this man.
It's Michael Franklin Sharp.
For Kettles, the case was intriguing because the investigation lacked several key components.
Mr. Sharp never gave the required statement he was required to give. And it doesn't appear like there was any investigation into his conduct.
Pix 11 News attained video of Sharp's deposition, a deposition where at times candid responses to Kettles' questions proved to be challenging.
In that minute 39 seconds, did anything in that time frame make it impossible for you to give the aircraft the frequency change?
That's the point.
Sharp did not respond for nearly 30 seconds. After minutes of back and forth and with Kettles rephrasing a yes or no question, Sharp ultimately gave this answer.
I don't know exactly what to tell you about that.
When I deposed Mr. Sharp approximately 3 years after the crash, at that time he was still on medical leave receiving 75% of his base pay tax-free, and he arrived at his deposition driving a Hummer with a advertising wrap advertising the sunglass shop that he was running at the time while on FAA medical leave.
In fact, here is Sharp's tanning salon and vision center in Fernandina Beach, Florida. A wrapped Hummer is showcased on site. And as for Sharp's salary at the time of the crash,
Maybe $135,000 a year.
later in the deposition, Sharp added that
My medical retirement is approved.
this after initially being denied. Pix 11 News attained Sharp's letter of reconsideration for his disability retirement, where he states that his actions or inactions that day led to the deaths of 5 men. As for the federal lawsuit brought by the relatives of the victims, Kettles says that the government ended up settling the case for 7 figures. During Pix 11 News' 7-month-long investigation, we made multiple trips to Washington, D.C. to try and speak with lawmakers associated with congressional aviation subcommittees as well as with the FAA. On June 25th, both were in the same room during a Senate hearing focused on next-gen technology as well as improving aviation safety.
Safety is the #1 concern that I have.
Senator Cory Booker made his priorities evident during the hearing.
Air traffic controllers have better information about...
As did FAA Deputy Administrator Michael Whitaker, who had no issues answering questions from 5 U.S. senators. But when the FAA's Assistant Administrator of Communications, Christy Greco, informed him that we were in the room at the immediate conclusion of the hearing, the #2 man at the FAA huddled with Greco for several minutes. Ultimately, Deputy Administrator Whitaker exited the room.
Mr. Whitaker, how you doing? Murrow, WPIX TV, New York City.
I then proceeded to inform Whitaker of the aviation safety issue we uncovered regarding controllers back in FAA towers or centers after contributing to deadly crashes. In some cases, controllers were back on the job a week or 2 after a crash, which led to this exchange.
Why does this happen?
So I'm not familiar with the issue.
Instead of inquiring to find out more about a pivotal aviation safety issue, it became painfully obvious that the FAA's #2 man was not going to address our inquiries, which ultimately led to this.
Who at the FAA can WPIX and myself talk to get answers?
So we'll make sure you get your answers.
As to which senior official at the FAA's headquarters can accommodate Pix 11 News for a sit-down interview?
Who's willing to sit down with
That
us?
I don't know. We'll have to get back with you, but I'm not familiar with the story and the issues. I mean, this testimony was about next gen, so
It's about aviation safety. That's what we're reporting on as well.
Yeah, so we'll get back with you.
Okay. We look forward to that.
Yeah.
Now, we did reach out to the FAA regarding that sit-down interview, and before I even had a chance to ask a question, the FAA sent me this email on July the 2nd stating that no one was available. This after the exchange that I had with their #2 man that you just saw. Now, allow me for one moment to highlight one key initiative from the FAA on the mission page of its website. It reads as follows: "Integrity is our touchstone. We perform our duties honestly with moral soundness and with the highest level of ethics." John Tampson.
I guess I feel like
I was going to say, we have not
constantly.
seen anything like that at all throughout this entire process.
No, you haven't, and you have been following this for a long time now.
Yeah, we have. We've been on this now for 7 months.
You did reach out to the FAA again last week. Head of Communications, Christy Greco, saw in your piece, but wanted all of your questions in advance, right?
Yeah, believe it or not, that's exactly what they asked for in this situation. I mean, since when has it become a prerequisite here for a taxpayer-funded agency that touts transparency to have all of our questions in advance? But I did ask this key question, okay? Does the FAA currently have air traffic controllers working in towers or control centers who were listed in an NTSB report as a contributing factor in a deadly crash, or whose actions were found to be a contributing factor by a federal judge in a deadly crash? Yes or no?
That certainly sounds like a simple yes or no question.
You can't get any more simple than that, John. And we have yet to hear again from the FAA.
Really disturbing and surprising, to be honest with you. Real quick, what is the number of air traffic controllers now?
We're up over 15.
15.
Incredible. All right, great job, Mario, as
Thank you.
always.
Appreciate it.
Keep going.